Hi there. Today we're going to be reading a chapter from the Parker Inheritance, written by Varian Johnson. This book was written for students in 3rd through 7th grades, and the guided reading level is Y. So let's go ahead and get into the book. So we're introduced to this book by the cover illustration, which is an illustration that features the two main protagonists, named Candace and Brandon, and the illustration features the two of them bicycling through their town. So this is a great book for preteens / young teens because it does feature these two protagonists who are about the same age. And it features the coming of age struggles that students may relate to, while also tackling very serious and important topics that some students may have also experienced, such as racial injustice, the racial injustice of the town's history that Candace and Brandon live in, having to deal with stubborn adults who don't want to face their biases, and all while Candace and Brandon are trying to solve a mystery. So this is a great book for tackling those serious topics and starting a discussion in classrooms on these topics. So let's go ahead and jump into the content. So we're going to be reading chapter 6 today, and we're continuing the story of Candace and Brandon, where Candace is trying to solve a mystery that her grandmother left behind with Brandon's help. So let's go ahead and read chapter 6, The Parker Inheritance. Chapter 6. Candace poked her head into her mother's office to tell her what they were up to. "Be careful up there," her mother said. Any trace of anger towards Candace from before had disappeared. "This house has been boarded up for months. There's no telling what you might find." The entrance to the attic was in the garage. Candace was already sweating by the time she pulled down the ceiling door. Brandon flipped on the light, and they headed up the rickety stairs. The wooden slates groaned beneath them. The attic was even hotter than the garage. They looked to be nothing but junk up there. Old Christmas decorations, a sewing machine, and spools of dated cloth. "Yuck," Brandon said, wiping at his face. "I just got some spiderweb in my mouth." Laughing, Candace walked to the far corner of the room. Then she smiled. "Over here," she said to Brandon. There, against the wall, was a box labeled for Candace. She had slid the box top off by the time Brandon had reached her. At first, all they found inside were textbooks, dictionaries, and old encyclopedias. "Not quite the new reading I was hoping for," Brandon said. They continued pulling book after book out of the box, but nothing seemed remotely interesting to Candace. Brandon had stopped to page through a book on Greek mythology. "This isn't that bad," he said. "Can I borrow it?" "Fine by me," Candace said, as she removed the last textbook. And that's when she saw the puzzle book. Candace recognized it immediately. It was a thick paperback full of logic games and brain teasers that she'd solved years ago. She brought the book to her nose. Maybe it was her imagination, but she thought she smelled traces of lavender. She cracked the book open, and an envelope slipped out and floated to the ground. Candace picked up the letter, thinking it was an old piece of mail that had been used as a bookmark long ago. She flipped it over, looked for an address. Instead, she found a small note. "Find the path. Solve the puzzle." So let's stop here to think. If Candace is trying to solve the mystery that her grandmother left behind, I almost wonder how this letter is going to impact the rest of the story. So think about that going forward. It was her grandmother's handwriting, swirling loops in dark blue ink. The words reminded Candace of what her grandmother used to always say: "Just because you don't see the path doesn't mean it's not there." Candace wiped her hands. They were sweaty and shaking. The note felt like a message from beyond the grave. She stole a peek at Brandon. He was still looking at the mythology book. She quickly returned the letter to the puzzle book. "We should head downstairs," she said. "We're going to melt if we stay up here much longer." He nodded. "Sure thing, but what about these other books?" "Don't worry about them," she said, already standing. "I'll come back later and box them up." He shrugged, but followed her downstairs. Once they reached the living room, Brandon peeked out the window. "Shoot, they're back." He smiled timidly at her. "Do you mind if I hang out here for a few more minutes? I promise I won't bother you." "Sure, No problem, she said, walking towards the kitchen, the puzzle book tight in her hands. I'll be back in a second. She sat down at the table and cracked open the book. Then she read the note on the envelope again. Yep, she was sure of it. It was her grandmother's handwriting. Since the envelope wasn't sealed, Candace decided there was no harm in seeing what was inside. It was only after she unfolded the sheet of paper that she hesitated. The letter was addressed to her grandmother. It seemed intrusive to read it. She almost returned it to the envelope. Almost. But she was a reader, she reminded herself. Readers read. And so Candace read the letter. Dated August 10th, 2007. Dear Miss Caldwell. Miss Caldwell was Candace's grandmother. I write to you on behalf of the Washington family. I'm sure you've never met them. How could you? The Allen boys ran them out of Lambert long before you arrived in the city. And when the Washingtons appealed for justice, city officials denied them at every turn. Enoch, Leanne, and Siobhan Washington became the newest victims of the city's long-standing discrimination against black people. I loved Siobhan, and that's why I spent 30 years destroying the Allens, step by step. My first strike was physical, and then I wrecked them financially. I was the majority owner of the corporation that bought out Allen Textiles. I purchased Solora Industries simply so I could move their plant out of Lambert, ruining the Allens' land lease. My goal was to wreak havoc not only on the Allens, but on the entire city. It seemed fitting. But Siobhan Washington still cared for Lambert. She asked me to show compassion. Unlike her father, unlike me, she believed in the balance of justice and forgiveness. And even now, 7 years after her death, I cannot deny her. Thus, I have created an opportunity for Lambert to earn back everything I took from the city, a fortune totaling $40 million at my last reckoning. I've created a puzzle mystery that will take you deep into the city's past. The person who finds this inheritance will receive 1/10 of the money. The remainder will be allocated to the city. In return, the winner must share what he or she learns through the puzzle with the world. Your first clue. Siobhan's father loved tennis, but he grew up idolizing a team in another sport. I wish you'd had a chance to meet Siobhan and her parents. Siobhan was amazing. But her mother was, too. Leanne Washington's days as a volunteer at her church did more for Lambert's children than most people will ever know. Like her mother, Siobhan believed in giving people second chances, or in my case, 3. She was truly greater than the sum of her parts. Beautiful, smart, educated, compassionate, she loved laughter and literature and math, and she was beauty personified on the tennis courts. Easily talented enough to thrive on the collegiate and national levels. But because she loved me more, she chose to give it up. She was everything a poor, simple boy like me could hope for. She loved all, black, white, rich, poor. She loved Lambert, despite what it did to her and her father. She loved me, even after I became a ghost of my former self. Here lies your challenge. Siobhan is the key, the one who will lead you to my fortune. She is the only reason you are getting this opportunity. Do not squander it. I have sent similar versions of this letter to the mayor, the school district, superintendent, the chair of the school board, and the editor of the Lambert Trader. Your predecessors failed to protect the Washington family at great cost. This is your chance to make right what was once so utterly wrong. This is your chance to create a better world for your grandchild. But do not delay. These clues, like Siobhan, will not be of this world forever. Hoping to find another page, Candace looked in the envelope, but it was empty. That was all there was to the letter. Who had written it? Why had he left it unsigned? And what was it still doing here in her grandmother's attic? Candace placed the letter on the table and wiped her still, clammy, sweaty hands on her jeans. She had never heard of Enoch or Leanne Washington, nor had she heard of Siobhan, whose name she pronounced in her head as C.O. Bon. All she knew was that Enoch Washington and his family were black, and the Allens were rich and powerful and white. When she had told her friends she was moving to Lambert for the summer, a city in the deep south, barely a fifth the size of Atlanta, Dee Dee had genuinely worried that Candace and her mom would be attacked by men in white robes on horseback. Candace's father, who was supposed to be chaperoning the girls to the mall and not listening in on them, quickly jumped into the conversation, telling them that they didn't need to worry about the Ku Klux Klan, especially in a progressive city like Lambert. Candace didn't exactly believe her father, but she also didn't know enough about the city to disagree with him. Even if Lambert was progressive now, though, could her father say the same about the city when the Washingtons lived there, whoever they were? She ran her thumb over her grandmother's handwritten words. Find the path, solve the puzzle. What if her grandmother hadn't made a mistake? What if there was a treasure? What if her grandmother had put the letter up there on purpose? For her. End of chapter 6. Okay, so this is a great mystery / children's literature book that students are really going to enjoy. And then after reading chapters like this, it can easily be led into discussion.